How a Sect Creates Killers, Part 2. This article in no way attempts to generalize all video games or equate them with absolute evil, nor are we accusing all the developers and creators of the games mentioned in this article. This is the second article in a series dedicated to the influence of video games on individuals. For a better understanding of the information presented herein, we recommend reviewing the first part, How a Sect Creates Killers, Part 1. Our interest in this topic stems from the fact that some video games have become a field of activity for members of an international totalitarian sect who gained access to the creation of those games in the role of consultants. In doing so, they managed to embed informational codes, programs, and subliminal implants used in their extremist ideology. In the previous article, we discussed the role of Rick Ross as a cult advisor for Ubisoft on Far Cry 5. We also examined internal elements of Far Cry 5 and the consequences the game leads to. Our conclusions were also based on feedback from gamers themselves who played the game, as well as data from reputable studies on the impact of video games. In this part, we take a broader look at the identified threat. In the course of studying the destructive influence of Alexander Dworkin's totalitarian sect through video games, we did not expect to encounter such a wide scope, one that affects not only public and school safety, but also poses a threat to the national security of multiple countries and even to the safety of political figures and followers of various religions. The political and religious dimensions turned out to be woven into the process of forming destructive images embedded in such video games. Let us examine one of the reasons behind the emergence of intolerance, division, and extremism in society along religious and political lines, as well as the process of forming and recruiting future terrorists. As it turns out, all of this is the handiwork of the international totalitarian sect led by Alexander Dworkin, with its extremist terrorist ideology. We begin with the aforementioned game Far Cry 5 and the religious and political symbols embedded in it. Christian elements in Far Cry 5 and user reactions. Some players, as well as participants in chats and forums, saw in the promo art for Far Cry 5 a direct reference to Christianity, more specifically to the Last Supper as depicted in Leonardo da Vinci's painting. When comparing these two images, one can clearly see a deliberate interpretation of the painting from the number of characters and their arrangement to such details as the position of their hands and heads, the direction of their gaze, the tilt of their bodies, and even the attempt to convey varying degrees of individual emotional reactions on their faces. As we can see, in the center of the table where Jesus Christ is depicted in Leonardo da Vinci's painting, surrounded by his disciples, the 12 apostles, the creators of Far Cry 5, in collaboration with Rick Ross, placed a cult leader. A comparative analysis of the composition, symbolism, and both visual and cultural elements leads to the conclusion that the developers of Far Cry 5 deliberately used the Last Supper composition as a basis for the game's artistic design. This is supported by the similar positioning of the figures, the central placement of the leader, and the overall symmetry of the scene. It is important to note that for Christians, the story of the Last Supper isn't merely a historical episode. It is the foundation of one of the main sacraments in Christianity, the Eucharist. Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper is one of the most recognizable works of art in the Christian tradition and is viewed by believers not just as a depiction of a significant event, but also as a profound Christian symbol. To a Christian audience, this painting carries sacred meaning, and any use of it in popular culture that deviates from canonical reverence and introduces a distorted subtext is perceived as blasphemy, an insult, a desecration of tradition and the feelings of the faithful, a religious sacrilege. It is also important to mention that the event known as the Last Supper precedes another key moment in Christianity: the arrest, torture, and crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the culmination of his sacrificial path. In this context, replacing the central figure of Jesus with a cult leader who, according to the game's plot, is to be captured and arrested, and replacing the sacred elements of the Eucharist with a weapon and a book can no longer be regarded as coincidental. This makes the reference appear even more sacrilegious. It sparked justified outrage among part of the audience and provoked heated debates. What the developers truly meant and what guided them while under the influence of Rick Ross's ideology is ultimately unknown. Perhaps the idea of using the Last Supper composition was presented to them as just a marketing tactic, a deliberate provocation intended to stir strong emotions and draw attention to the game. You may be inclined to believe this kind of explanation if it weren't for the fact that such a narrative is usually implanted in the minds of people who, for some reason, have lost the ability to think independently. Yet such a scenario is entirely plausible, as a similar situation already occurred in 1993, when FBI and ATF agents lost control of an operation while under the influence of Rick Ross. That ended in the deaths of dozens of American citizens in what is now known as the Waco tragedy. You can read more about it in Part 1. Considering that the game developers, just like the FBI before them, were also in contact with Rick Ross, it's entirely possible they failed to see the harmful aspects and consequences of this narrative that not only discredits the Last Supper as one of the most important symbols of the world's largest religion, Christianity, but also devalues the path of suffering that followed for Jesus Christ. Whether the game creators acted knowingly in the desecration of Christianity is uncertain. However, what is definitely known is the true attitude of Rick Alan Ross's colleagues, adherents of the totalitarian sect, and their leader, Alexander Dvorkin, toward Christianity. That attitude is revealed in their remarks about Jesus Christ and his teaching. For starters, we can cite a statement made by Cynthia Kisser, former head of the notoriously controversial anti-cult organization CAN, which many researchers directly associated with Alexander Dvorkin during his time in the United States, and in which Rick Ross was an active member. In one of interviews, Cynthia Kisser admitted that if Jesus Christ were alive nowadays, they would apply their entire arsenal of methods against him, and then pass that information on to mass media, who would publish anti-cult smear pieces about his so-called fringe activities, unethical behavior, and deceptive practices, portraying Jesus as a cult leader. When it comes to examining an organization, the words of its top officials are often instructive, and the views of the last executive director of the old CAN, Cynthia Kisser, shed much light on the agenda of CAN's former leaders and explain their fascination with Christians. If Jesus Christ were alive now, she told the Cleveland Plain Dealer, we'd take an interest in him because of the great controversy surrounding his fringe activities. We'd try to see if there was abuse, unethical behavior, or deceptive practices, and I'd send whatever we could find to reporters. Another revealing example comes from Alexander Dvorkin, who later assumed leadership of this international network of the so-called fighters against cults and sects, which is actually one of the most dangerous real-world totalitarian sects in itself. Here's what Alexander Dvorkin said about a fundamental theological concept in Christianity: the existence of the soul in every human. You constantly hear the same arguments. God is one, so why do people invent different religions? God is in the soul, as if, forgive me, God is mold that appears in the soul by itself. I always want to ask this question. From what moment did he appear in you, and how do you actually know that he is there? What are the fruits, and what is the name of the God in your soul? Do you know this? Then it means, God is in the soul, so why go to church? Alexander Dvorkin. Problems of the mission of the modern Russian Orthodox Church. With this statement, Alexander Dvorkin attacks a central dogma of Christianity, that God is one and dwells within every person. The leader of this international totalitarian sect not only distorts the essence of Christian teaching, but openly rejects the words of Jesus Christ, likening God in the soul to mold, thereby revealing his true attitude towards Christianity. But let us now return to Far Cry 5. Another point worth noting is that in discussions about similarities between the Far Cry 5 promo art and the Last Supper painting, users focused not so much on the figure of Jesus, but rather on Judas the Apostate, specifically on identifying his counterpart among the characters in Far Cry 5. The question of who apostates really are, the role they play, and their ties to present-day self-proclaimed cult fighters, colleagues of Rick Ross and Alexander Dvorkin, has already been explored in the article The Role of Apostates in Anti-Cult Organizations Creating the Fake Victim. Overall, this allusion to Christianity received a negative response in comment threads and discussions across various forums, Critical reactions also appeared under videos on the official YouTube channel of Ubisoft, the developer and publisher of Far Cry 5, including videos featuring interviews with Rick Ross. Far Cry 5 symbolism that became a precedent for disputes and confrontation between adherents of Christianity and Islam. The composition became so much discussed that it provoked controversy and polarization among users. Some accused the game developers of insulting and blasphemy, while others saw nothing wrong in it. Yet there were also those who called for replacing the antagonist depicted with Christian elements with a representative of Islam. Thus, a precedent was created that provoked a conflict on web platforms between adherents of two world religions, Christians and Muslims. Fortunately, the conflict remained within the realm of verbal clashes and did not escalate into something more serious. However, the emergence of this kind of confrontation, ingrained division, and rejection on interreligious grounds in the minds of the disputing parties, laying the foundation for potential aggressive outbursts in the future if additional external triggers would arise. After the announcement, Far Cry 5 became the subject of an online petition filed on change.org by individuals who objected to the portrayal of American Christians as villains. The petition authors called for a remake of the antagonists in the game and suggested replacing them with members of urban gangs, other non-white antagonists, or Muslims as possible replacements. Whether the creators of this game wanted that or not, with Rick Ross's help, they achieved not just discrediting of one religion, but the clash of views between followers of two world religions, introduction of a narrative of hostility and division in society, and reinforcement of the distorted understanding of Islam and Christianity that already exists in people's minds. In this case, the destructive process is undoubtedly a consequence of the involvement of Rick Alan Ross as a consultant during the game's development. The international totalitarian organization he belongs to is the very source and cause of the long-term campaign to discredit authentic, peaceful Islam, to incite hostility between the Islamic and non-Islamic worlds, and to deliberately fuel interreligious conflict. This has been repeatedly exposed earlier on the website actfiles.org. Creating a manipulative political narrative and discrediting American citizens and the national symbol of the United States. Let us note an interesting point in the history of video games. With the exception of Grand Theft Auto, GTA, and the Postal, very few medium and large budget video games have used American citizens as deadly targets. Much like 1980s action movies, most video games used a less specific image by default, devoid of features of an ordinary average person. In earlier shooters, the antagonists were Nazis, foreign terrorists with no distinct national, political, or religious characteristics, and creatures that were definitely unrelated to the human species such as robots, aliens, zombies, or Nazi zombies. Even more rare occurrence was the depiction of a certain clearly defined type of citizens as deadly targets, Americans, as in the case of Far Cry 5, or any type characterizing representatives of a certain nation as an enemy. It was preferred to portray antagonists in a broad and less contradictory and provocative manner. In other words, gamers had an amorphous, generalized image of the enemy in their subconsciousness, one they couldn't see in real everyday life, and the potential consequences of such games were less dangerous for society. Even if there was a phenomenon of game transfer to real life, a gamer did not become a threat to society. The game transfer phenomena, GTP, is a recorded and researched occurrence among gamers, and it has been discussed in detail in the previous article. A number of media outlets and critics drew attention to the key artwork of Far Cry 5. From the moment the game was announced, discussions emerged surrounding its choice of setting, which can be interpreted as an aggressive shift in the first-person shooter genre. The argument was that Far Cry 5 was the first game in the series to cast as enemies a group representing specific aspects of American culture: religiosity, separatism, and gun culture. The enemies are no longer zombies, aliens, Nazis, or isolated targets that require skill to kill, but American citizens. This is no longer just a game that represents the standard understanding of violence in video games. It's a game that makes it acceptable to kill virtual versions of a particular group of people based on particular traits. In this case, Americans labeled as cultists. It's a game that changes the sights of the first-person shooter genre by targeting, in this case, people within the United States. Considering additional aspects that will be discussed later in the article, it's important to clarify that Far Cry 5 effectively renders it acceptable to kill characters who, by all attributes, represent the majority of people living in the USA. Far Cry 5 is saturated with references to American culture and everyday life. That is, images familiar to the average citizen. Radio stations playing patriotic music, dialogues about freedom and true Americans, as well as visuals like pickup trucks with US flags, echoing the aesthetics of rural America. All of this is portrayed within the narrative framework of a power grab by a cult leader against whom it is necessary to fight, and who, according to the plot, must be stopped and captured, while his cultists are to be killed. This brings us to a critical element skillfully embedded into the plot and symbolism of Far Cry 5, with the help of anti-cult consultant Rick Ross. Looking ahead, it's worth noting that the consequences of this information code embedded in the game became visible to the world on July 13, 2024, but we'll get to that in due course. Far Cry 5 symbolism and the US flag. The next element is the use in Far Cry 5 of the national symbol of the United States, the US flag over which the main antagonist of the game, the cult leader, has spread his arms. Such an image cannot be just a random combination of elements, and there is evidence for that. Let's recall the words of Far Cry 5 creator Dan Hay, quoted in the first part. "The devil is in the details of this stuff," which he said in a joint interview with Rick Ross. Through the use of the national symbol, the US flag, in the game, a reference is made to the seizure of power by the cult leader. A negative image is thus formed and reinforced by the accompanying plot elements of religious fanaticism, social control, and the cult of personality, the whole set of manipulative narratives that Rick Ross and his colleagues from Alexander Dworkin's sect have been using for decades in their practice. The US flag, officially called Stars and Stripes, symbolizes the history, values, and unity of the United States of America. The 50 stars on the blue field in the upper left corner represent the 50 US states. In Far Cry 5, however, this national symbol is deliberately altered. In some in-game visuals, it is clear that the stars on the blue portion of the flag are replaced with stylized crosses, the emblem of the project at Eden's Gate cult, as in the image above. In other depictions, the stars remain, but the same main cult symbol is inserted at the center among them, as seen in the images below. Given that 50 stars symbolize the 50 states, replacing them with the cult's key sign suggests that every state has fallen under the control of the cult leader. Hence, we see a deliberate visual narrative using the US national symbol in order to radicalize American patriotism, blending it with a distorted form of Christianity and militarism. This is evident in the visual elements and imagery embedded in the game, and aligns strikingly with the objectives of Alexander Dworkin's international totalitarian sect, which includes Rick Ross as an active member. The goals of this international sect include destabilization of the United States from within, destruction of American democracy, and maintaining conditions for a split among American citizens in order to create a conflict that will escalate to a civil war. More information about the true enemy of the United States, the country that is a stronghold of democracy and freedom in the world, was previously revealed on the website actfiles.org, particularly in the articles "America is in Decline," "Truth or Informational Indoctrination," and "The Impact." Episode 1. What is their plan and key instrument? Video and text version, as well as in the Impact documentary. When analyzing symbols and images in Far Cry 5, it becomes obvious that all the elements in the game have been introduced consciously and purposefully. Thus, a question arises. Who was meant by the cult leader? It's not difficult to answer this question, especially if you consider the timeline of the development and release of Far Cry 5 and the accompanying events in the US political arena. We're talking about the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States in the November 2016 elections. The role of Far Cry 5 in the campaign to discredit Donald Trump by the representatives of the International Anti-Cult Network led by Alexander Dvorkin. Let's compare political events in the States with the timeline of development and release of the game Far Cry 5. On June 16, 2015, at his headquarters, Donald Trump officially announced his intention to run for President of the United States as a Republican candidate. On November 8, 2016, the U.S. presidential election was held, where, according to the results of the vote count on November 9th, Donald Trump had secured the required 270 Electoral College votes to win. On November 19, 2016, the official results were announced across all states, with Donald Trump receiving 304 electoral votes, making him the new President of the United States. The inauguration of the 45th U.S. President took place on January 20, 2017. As for the development of Far Cry 5, it is known that as early as 2016, Ubisoft had already begun working on the fifth part of the Far Cry video game series. The official announcement of Far Cry 5 was made on May 26, 2017. The game was released globally on March 27, 2018. The years 2017 to 2018 marked a period of escalating political and ideological conflict in the United States and active informational confrontation, accompanied by criticism and attempts to discredit President Donald Trump. Notably, those years were marked by systematic media publications, where the derogatory label cult leader was used in reference to the American president. Let's recall that Rick Ross played an active role as a consultant in the development of Far Cry 5. We have already examined one of the discrediting narratives used in this game, conveyed through the use of a national symbol, the U.S. flag, over which the cult leader spread his arms and laid a weapon. In other words, this is a clear attempt to deliberately construct a narrative of a cult leader seizing power in the U.S., precisely during the time when Donald Trump was the acting president, and when Rick Ross's long-term accomplices had launched the most brutal discrediting campaign against him. The fact that Far Cry 5 included a reference specifically targeting Donald Trump's presidential campaign is also supported by a number of additional indications. Compromising material and the search for an incriminating videotape. In one of the missions of Far Cry 5, in order to expose the Eden's Gate cult, the player is tasked with retrieving a compromising videotape that captures the cult's activities under the influence of a drug called Bliss. To do this, the player must infiltrate cult territory, locate, and recover the tape. The footage itself is never directly shown in the game, but its description and context, a scandalous recording capable of ruining a reputation, led many players to draw immediate associations with political events in the United States. The element of the compromising tape on the cult leader in the game clearly references the real political context in the U.S. from 2016 to 2019 involving Donald Trump. Specifically, it echoes rumors of an alleged video supposedly compromising Trump. These rumors were widely discussed in the mass media as the so-called Steele dossier. The author of this discredited dossier, a collection of rumors about Donald Trump, was a counterintelligence specialist and former British intelligence officer, Christopher Steele. Notably, one of Steele's key sources for gathering this compromising material was Russian national Igor Danchenko, originally from the city of Perm, Russia. It is important to note that investigations into this alleged collusion between Trump collusion and the Kremlin dragged on for nearly 3 years, served as the basis of countless articles, books, and television programs, and were subjected to thorough scrutiny, yet no evidence of collusion was ever found. Far Cry 5, Make Hope Great Again versus Donald Trump's Make America Great Again, MAGA. Make America Great Again, MAGA, is Donald Trump's iconic slogan of his 2016 campaign. While the phrase Make Hope Great Again is never spoken verbatim in Far Cry 5, it is woven into the cult ideology and appears in visual and textual elements throughout the game. According to the game plot, posters, signs, and speeches by members of the Eden's Gate cult emphasize the idea of purification and hope's return to a certain idealized state. Taking into account the fact that the game takes place in the United States, gamers also noted a clear parallel to MAGA rhetoric, which called for the return of America's greatness. The key art of the game was also aimed at reinforcing these obvious parallels. Promotional materials such as trailers and posters depicted the cult using patriotic and messianic symbols. As noted earlier, U.S. flags and religious symbolism were prominently featured, provoking direct associations with Donald Trump's MAGA. Moreover, this reference was clearly made in dialogues of the cult leader's entourage. According to the story, in the region controlled by Joseph Seed, who led the cult, you can find graffiti with similar propaganda, or hear remarks subtly echoing Trump's famous slogan, e.g., calls to return hope to its rightful owners, or to revive the region. It is fair to note that Far Cry 5's religious and political elements described above, including the reference to MAGA transmitted in the propaganda of Eden's Gate cult through posters, dialogues, and general rhetoric. All of this was characterized by critics as subtle and superficial hints without obvious provocations rather than a coarse manifestation of propaganda. This led some to question whether the game was really attempting to parallel real-world political events in the United States, and even more so to discredit American President Donald Trump through Far Cry 5. Critics came to the conclusion that this game is nothing more than a political satire of American conservatism and populism. There were those who saw the game as a blatant provocation, while others took it as a funny reference. However, considering all the embedded images in Far Cry 5 and the involvement of anti-cult consultant Rick Ross in the game development, this cannot reasonably be described as mere satire, a happenstance, a coincidence, or even a provocation. For masters of manipulation who have spent decades skillfully influencing human consciousness and the subconscious, such subtle cues are far more significant and effective, since they allow subliminal implants to penetrate deep into the player's subconscious and remain there for as long as possible. It's also essential to note the conditions in which this so-called satire is presented. The game's events unfold amid relentless violence and brutality, at times so graphic that it triggered disgust among gamers, as noted in several reviews of this game. In such a sauce of contradiction, a blend of manipulation, philosophy, and violence, combined with vivid images of natural landscapes and immersive audiovisual effects, at the moment when a gamer's attention is utmost distracted, or as in such scenes scattered, these subtle and seemingly insignificant implants are able to reach their target without the player's awareness. Later, in combination with additional triggers, those implanted programs will play a crucial role at a proper moment. The puzzle will come together, and a new adherent in the dormant army of killers will be ready to save the world from a cultist identified for them by Rick Ross or Alexander Dvorkin, or by someone else from this international totalitarian sect of maniacs and murderers. The campaign to systematically discredit Donald Trump clearly demonstrates what additional triggers accompanied the influence of the game Far Cry 5 and where it ultimately led. Years-long campaign to discredit Donald Trump by Rick Ross's colleagues. In parallel and in sync with Rick Ross's involvement in the development of Far Cry 5, his colleagues operating under unified control from Russia and led by Alexander Dvorkin actively carried out an information campaign to discredit and dehumanize the legitimately elected 45th President of the United States. This smear campaign continued throughout Donald Trump's first term and did not stop afterwards. It's important to clarify who Rick Ross's colleagues are. In addition to the Russian group led by Alexander Dvorkin, his accomplices include individuals such as Stephen Hessen, Alexandra Stein, Dave Troy, and many others. Examples of materials they produced to discredit Donald Trump will be provided below. The discrediting campaign against Donald Trump unfolded in several stages. From 2016 to 2019, narratives created by the aforementioned anti-cultists about the cult of Trump gradually saturated the media landscape. Beginning in 2019, the campaign gained significant momentum, particularly with the release of the book The Cult of Trump by American anti-cultist, deprogrammer, and member of Dvorkin's totalitarian sect, Stephen Hessen. Around the same time, Rick Ross himself actively fueled a new wave of hysteria around what came to be known as the cult of Trump. After 2019, dehumanization of Donald Trump did not subside, but only intensified. A new surge of demonizing media content emerged following the well-known events at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. In a 2021 CNN interview, Hessen stated that the entire country needed deprogramming.
All of America needs deprogramming because we've all been negatively influenced by Donald Trump.
The next wave of dehumanization of Donald Trump began with his new presidential campaign, before Trump's election as the 47th President of the United States, where he replaced Joe Biden. Let's highlight the favorite topics raised by adherents of Alexander Dworkin's totalitarian sect in the U.S. Speculation on the subject of American democracy, discrediting Donald Trump and those around him, including Elon Musk, when he supported the former 45th and future 47th president in his 2024 election campaign. Let's focus on the statements by deprogrammer and cult fighter Steven Hessen. For years in his interviews, Hessen has been claiming that Donald Trump built a destructive cult around himself, acting as a narcissistic leader. Hessen has also repeatedly argued that Trump's supporters, meaning a part of U.S. citizens and voters, are in a state of hypnotic submission. It was this pseudo-expert, a henchman of Rick Ross and yet another consultant with maniacal tendencies, who advocated the forced deprogramming of those American citizens who support Trump. The deprogramming process implies a forced change of a person's worldview through violent means, that is, by forced confinement, prolonged deprivation of freedom, and a use of physical and psychological abuse. That's exactly how both consultants, professional deprogrammers Steven Hessen and Rick Alan Ross, conducted numerous deprogramming sessions on their unfortunate victims in the past. As already mentioned, in 2019, Steven Hessen released his book, The Cult of Trump, thereby setting a precedent that escalated the discreditation and harassment of the then-sitting 45th President of the United States. In his social media posts, Steven Hessen also repeatedly discredited Trump's slogan, MAGA, Make America Great Again. We should note that the campaign discrediting the American president was well thought out and legally calculated by the adherents of Dworkin's totalitarian sect. They labeled Donald Trump as cult leader and his supporters as cultists, but refrained from openly calling for violence against him. After all, they no longer needed such appeals. The necessary program of violence and persecution targeting the cult leader had already taken root in the minds of tens of millions of people across the globe. We're talking about Far Cry 5 again, where a player's main task is to kill the cultist, the one whom Alexander Dworkin's totalitarian sect would point to. According to official data alone, in the first 5 years of its release, Far Cry 5 had been played by 30 million users worldwide, as reported by Ubisoft in 2023. After reviewing the material above and knowing that the key narrative surrounding the events at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, was used by Rick Ross Associates, the self-proclaimed experts on cults, also known as anti-cultists, to discredit President Trump. Posts like the one below take on a different meaning. We have Far Cry 5 at home, reads the caption, alongside a photo of the events at the Capitol. It's not hard to guess what kind of effect such a post could have on someone whose subconsciousness had already been primed with the rest of the puzzle pieces. It could serve as a trigger to transfer elements of the video game into real life. Assassination attempt number 1. On July 13, 2024, former President and U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump was wounded in the right ear as a result of a shooting at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The event was part of his 2024 campaign. Former President Donald Trump speaks during a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, on July 13, 2024, before the assassination attempt on his life. This incident was previously discussed in the article, "Shooting is only the start of a broader plot against Donald Trump." Assassination attempt number 2. On September 15, 2024, a second attempt on Donald Trump's life took place near Trump's golf club in Florida. Trump wasn't injured. The criminal tried to escape from the scene by car. A witness photographed the suspect's car, which helped authorities track him down and arrest him. Law enforcement officers work around Trump International Golf Club after an apparent assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump on September 15th. Assassination attempt number 3. On October 12, 2024, likely a third assassination attempt was prevented in California. An armed man with a fake pass tried to get into the Trump rally in Coachella, but was detained by police at a checkpoint half a mile from the rally. According to police, the suspect was in a black SUV when he was arrested, and had illegally acquired weapons with him: a shotgun, a loaded pistol, and a high-capacity clip. These are the documented consequences of the many years of activity by the adherents of Alexander Dworkin's totalitarian sect of killers and maniacs. Fortunately, in the case of the current 47th U.S. President Donald Trump, their efforts have failed. But in the case of other politicians in other countries, this international sect of maniacs and murderers, unfortunately, achieved more successful results. Examples of attacks on politicians in other countries, instigated by cult fighters. For instance, in Japan, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated in 2022. The killer referred to the victim's ties to the Unification Church and claimed that Abe had been promoting this religious movement. It's important to note that the Unification Church has been the target of a years-long smear campaign and was branded with the derogatory label cult by agents of the same international totalitarian sect of sadists and murderers led by Alexander Dworkin. The second illustrative example is the shooting of Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico on May 15, 2024. After the government meeting, when the Prime Minister went outside to address the public, 71-year-old writer Juraj Cintula opened fire. Robert Fico sustained multiple gunshot wounds and was taken to the hospital in critical condition. It's interesting to note the words spoken by the shooter Cintula after the arrest. Why are the media being targeted? Why is RTVS under attack? In addition to the years of negative and inhumane publications about Robert Fico, often employing the same derogatory labels, cult and sect, used by journalists from a number of media outlets associated with Alexander Dworkin's totalitarian sect and its extremist terrorist ideology, there was another key aspect in the political steps of the Slovak Prime Minister, which turned out to be unacceptable to adherents of this totalitarian sect in Slovakia. Robert Fico became an obstacle to their plans in Slovakia's information space. This became particularly clear when a decision was under consideration to liquidate RTVS television company, the mouthpiece of anti-cultists, Dworkin's agents. Not long after this proposal was raised, an attempt was made on Robert Fico's life. It is worth noting that when the gunman opened fire at Fico, the Prime Minister's team was just proposing to increase oversight of RTVS. After the shooting, the detained first expressed opposition to the dissolution of RTVS, as shown in the quote above. Let's revisit the shooter's words. Why are the media being targeted? Why is RTVS under attack? These words, spoken immediately after the assassination attempt, are just a fragment of the code. This was the key element for the adherents of Alexander Dworkin's totalitarian sect in shaping yet another killer. It's important to highlight a fact that applies to all of the shootings and arrests. If law enforcement agencies had arranged for specialists to perform regressive hypnosis on the attackers, they could have discovered what exactly served as the final trigger. This would allow investigators to trace the sources of information that planted and shaped the dominant image in the attacker's subconscious, turning a rational, sane, and mentally stable individual into a controlled weapon of murder. Such individuals become the sleeper army of killers shaped by Alexander Dworkin. The effect of this puzzle piece coding is long-term, but it is so powerful that it overrides the natural instinct of self-preservation in people. However, since experts currently lack an understanding of how these lone wolves are actually created, all the public outrage and condemnation is directed at the shooters, who in fact are just as much victims as those they were programmed to kill. As a result, Robert Fico was severely wounded and remained unconscious in critical condition for several days. Fortunately, he survived, unlike Shinzo Abe in Japan and many other political figures who became victims of this totalitarian sect of maniacs and murderers in other countries. Donald Trump's attempts to counter mass shootings and school shootings during his first presidency. There were two other campaigns in Donald Trump's political record worth noting. The first is his effort to stop the alleged impact of video games on the developing minds of children, and thus counteract such phenomena as school shootings and mass shootings, and the general rise in violence. He spoke out on this in 2018 and 2019. On March 8, 2018, after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, where 17 people died, Trump held a meeting at the White House with representatives from the video game industry, parent groups, and critics. At the meeting, he showed an 88-second montage of violent scenes from video games to illustrate his concerns and raise questions about child safety. Just 19 days after this event, on March 27, 2018, the video game Far Cry 5 was released, and 4 years later, Trump survived a series of attempts on his life. On August 5, 2019, after the mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, 22 people dead, and Dayton, Ohio, 9 dead, Trump made a speech where he said,
"Second, we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately."
Many critics, including journalists and politicians, have argued that President Trump's focus on video games distracts from more pressing issues such as gun control. As evidence, they pointed to countries like Japan and Canada that have high rates of video game consumption but low levels of gun violence thanks to their strict firearms laws. This was often cited to show that the problem isn't the games, but easy access to guns. However, as seen in the case of Shinzo Abe in Japan, the real problem isn't access to firearms. The real issue is the long-standing coordinated activity of adherents of Alexander Dvorkin's totalitarian sect. In 2020, the American Psychological Association, APA, clarified that there is insufficient scientific evidence to confirm a causal link between violent video games and real-life violent behavior. This statement is also true, since not all video games contain puzzle piece coding, even if they feature violence and aggression. Donald Trump's second presidency and his America First policy. Trump's second major undertaking began in January 2025, when the 47th President of the United States launched an initiative targeting the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, as part of his broader America First policy. This initiative includes proposals for major budget cuts to USAID, its potential merger with the Department of State, or even the agency's complete shutdown. Elon Musk, head of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has also played an active role in these efforts, labeling USAID a criminal organization. While the final outcome remains uncertain, significant steps have already been taken. Several statements regarding USAID deserve attention. On February 26, 2025, hearings were held by the U.S. House Subcommittee on Government Operations and Oversight, during which USAID was accused of sponsoring terrorism. Previously, Senator Ted Cruz had claimed that USAID was funding terrorist groups. In this context, there is particular concern about USAID's financing of informational terrorist attacks aimed at undermining democracy. More than $250 million has reportedly been channeled into supporting a vast network of journalists and media outlets under the pretense of promoting independent media. Trump's campaign against USAID has also drawn attention due to revelations about USAID's links to the international totalitarian sect led by Alexander Dvorkin, including ties to the aforementioned pseudo-experts and cult advisors associated with Rick Ross, who for years have been engaging in dehumanization and discrediting of Donald Trump in the media field. These connections were previously detailed in the article, "How the Tail is Wagging the Dog." USAID funding was actually used, among other things, to support subversive operations carried out by the international totalitarian sect curated from Russia. President Trump's actions in this regard are of undeniable importance. At this point, it's abundantly clear that the international totalitarian sect, led by Alexander Dvorkin, must cease its existence in our society, and that the true perpetrators behind brutal school shootings and mass shootings, as well as numerous isolated attacks, must face real consequences as actual killers, psychopaths, and sadists covertly manipulating people's minds. UN research. In conclusion, here is another fact about the world of video games. It turns out that not only the games themselves, but also gaming chats, forums, and even clone versions of popular games can serve as more than just entertainment platforms or spaces for gamers to socialize. They can become venues for recruiting future terrorists and tools for further manipulating players' consciousness and subconsciousness. These findings were shared during the New Quest Unlocked event. The alarming trend has necessitated a collaborative research approach with the gaming industry and adjacent platforms, Mr. Sekera said, highlighting how extremist groups are increasingly targeting gaming spaces and adjacent platforms like Discord and Telegram. Steven Sekera: while gaming has many positive aspects in terms of social interaction around the world, there's also increasing risk that terrorists and violent extremist groups are using these platforms and the gaming-adjacent platforms to get their message out. The findings are stark. In Australia alone, approximately 1 in 5 counter-terrorism cases now involve young people, with gaming platforms playing a role in every investigated case. In light of the emerging reality that terrorists and killers may be cultivated through video games, here's a brief but telling fact. The Wikipedia category, Video Games About Cults, currently includes 148 titles. Each of those games has reached a multi-million audience over the course of many years. We are not claiming that all the games necessarily contain elements of puzzle piece coding. We will leave such conclusions to be examined by qualified experts.